This is the Independent Sales Surtax Oversight Committee. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone for coming, and start with the roll call, please. Greta, you want to do it?
Am I doing the roll call?
Yes,
okay.
ma'am, please.
I sure will. Frederick Atkins.
Here.
Alyssa, is it Brandamule? Not yet. Joe Catty? Not yet. Greta Campbell present. Sandra Dottie. James Dozier. Fred Elliott. Here. Randy Crease. Chris Lopez.
Here.
Joe Mazurkowitz Jr.
Here.
Jim Nathan. Dennis Perlman.
Here.
Michelle Perez, is it Macias?
Macias, here.
Macias. Brian Rist.
Here.
Carmen Salome.
Here.
Steve Shemp.
I'm here.
Chris, is it Simoneau? Semino, almost.
Close enough.
And Chris Patrica, who is our school board liaison.
Here.
Okay.
See what they do to Shemp, then you
Thank you. We have a quorum present. We will, and thank you all for making this meeting. First item on the agenda is public comment. Any members of the public wish to address the board on items concerning issues that are covered under the Independent Sales Surtax Oversight Committee? Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing no members of the public wanting to come forward for public input, we will go to the next item on the agenda. The next item is approval of the January 31st, 2019 minute meetings. In your packet, you have been mailed a draft copy of the minutes of our organizational meeting. Chair would accept a motion to approve.
I move approval.
Motion and a second. Motion by Steve, second by Chris. Any additions or corrections to the minutes? Remember that because the secretary is a voting member of this committee, these drafts are hers and hers alone until we approve them. They've not been reviewed by anyone, so extra time and attention to the minutes. Additions or corrections? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve the minutes of January 31st, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. The ayes have it. Motion passes unanimously. Next item is the approval of the March 7th workshop minutes. Chair would accept the motion to approve.
Motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Motion by Mr. Lopez.
Second.
Second by Fred. Any additions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve the minutes of the workshop meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next, we get into our presentations from school board staff, the sales tax summary as of March 28, 2019. Who from staff is leading the presentation?
Good afternoon, board members, committee members. Thank you for being here this evening. We are excited to share with you the fresh off the press news that we have received our first sales tax receipts we have received notice of the first sales tax receipts will be coming to us, that we have not actually received them. And so we think that that's a great cause for celebration and wanted to get that information to you right away. In your packet that we distributed to you in advance, we have provided 2 copies of documents that were presented to the school board on earlier this month. And so if there are any questions about the financial report or the receipts, we'd like to take your questions.
Well, at first, let's talk about the receipts through March 28th. Although we have no actual receipts, is your estimate that you received in line with what you have been projecting, or higher, or lower? What is it?
It's very close to the projections. We're anticipating 6.38 million, and that's right in line with what our original forecast was. And that's for the month of January, I'm sorry. So we've only received tentative information that has been posted for the month of January sales receipts in the amount of 6.38 million. and that's the single piece of data that we have on the receipts collected, and they have not, those funds have not been yet received by the district, but that is the first piece of information that we received from the state regarding sales tax collections this year.
Chairman, she's very soft-spoken. Would you ask her to move a little closer to the speaker, please? I said that very quietly in order to help you.
You did. You see, you have to, I am very loud-spoken,
I know.
so yes.
We noticed.
Thank you. You noticed, did you, huh? You want me to back that away?
No, 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 you're doing good.
Would you like to, would you like me to repeat any of that information, or are we good to go?
Why don't you summarize what you just said about where,
To summarize, the state has posted to its website information that for the month of January, we anticipate receiving $6.38 million, which is right on right in track with our projections for the month of January.
any comments or questions regarding the projections for sales tax?
And that's all available through the Department of Revenue, correct? On their website?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's no questions on that. Let's talk about the expenditures through March 28th, 2019.
Okay. Okay, so far, year-to-date, we have expenditures for our construction project, which is the Triple M, the Lehigh Senior Renovation Project. And I think what I'd like to do is take you to our website and show you our Change for Change website with the financial information has been launched. And so I'll go ahead and display the live, there we go, maybe. We're having a little technical difficulties today. So at Lehigh Senior High School, we have planned projects from March through June of $14 million. And these are in the construction and maintenance categories. And so if you scroll down, you can see the estimated project amounts and the amount spent. Oops, I'm sorry, did I go to the wrong one? Okay.
Yes, Greta.
What was the period for the March expenditures of 14.2 million?
Okay. I'm sorry, could you say your question again, Ms. Campbell?
What was the period for the expenditures for the Lehigh renovation project? That was January through what? You said 14.2 million, but I didn't get for what period?
Okay, so the budgeted amount for the, is 14 million for the period, and that was not the expenditure amount, I'm sorry, that was the
Okay.
budgeted amount.
Okay, for the Lehigh renovation project.
Okay.
Here's the two expenditures, which is just under construction, and lighting at a zero.
Okay, so I'm going to navigate from our home page to the Change for Change and then tracking sales tax, your tax dollars, and that launches the main district page for the overview for all of the sales tax expenditures. So on the left side, we have the large column indicates the estimated expenditures for the period of March through June. Pardon? I'm very tongue-tied tonight. The revenue, estimated revenue for the period of March through June, and we have no actual expenditures posted. What I do want to share with you is that we do have some projects going on that we are funding through cash. And as sales tax comes to us, we will allocate the funds to the sales tax account. But at this point in time, as we have not received revenue, we have not, of course, allocated any expenditures.
So could you share with us what funds you have spent that will be replenished by the sales tax when it comes in for the time period that's delineated on the agenda?
Kelly, can you
Can you
answer
do that?
Okay, I'm locked up here. Hold on a second. Come on. Got a frozen screen.
But for the construction site MMM, the new high school, we've expended about 400,000. I think she has it right there now. 405,840 for that new high school MMM.
There you go.
Yeah, 400.
And if you see under electrical and lighting replacement upgrades, that's lighting at Estero High School.
So y'all's eyes are better than mine. I can't see much of that, so can you say it again, please?
Yes, there was like $405,000 expended at high school MMM, that's the new high school in Gateway.
Okay, I can see it now.
And then there was, I forget how much the amount was, it was lighting at Estero High School.
So let's look at them and discuss them in the same blocks that we have been talking about them to date. In the area of construction, in the first quarter, you spent $405,840. Any questions? And that was for preliminary expenditures associated with the expansion of the new school.
It's phase one of the planning of the MMM High School. Yes, so.
Okay. Any comments or questions about that?
If you click where it says high school MMM, will it drop down and tell us, you know, what that $405,000?
That's a feature that we're going to apply to the website, but at this point, you could navigate to each school individually from the menu across the top right here. And so, for example, our high schools, we don't have MMM as it's not in existence yet. But for example, we have the Lehigh Senior, now we're zoomed in.
Parker can tell them exactly what it's.
Okay.
Yeah, we just recently engaged with mitigation, a deposit, so we could save approximately $140,000 by getting the credits from last year's amount from our mitigation bank. So that was the $405,000 was the deposit on the balance of, I believe, just over $1 million for mitigation.
Say that again.
Part of the project now, we just got our Army Corps permits coming in place and in water management, and we had to get mitigation credits. So you buy mitigation bank credits, and the $405,000 was a deposit to lock the credits in to complete our permitting. So that's what you see up there, $405,000.
Thank you. Thank you. That makes sense. All right, let's go. If there's any other questions on the lead, that's the only capital expenditure in the first quarter.
Correct.
Let's go into the maintenance projects.
All right. It's not a question, but a comment.
Sure.
I'm thinking, I guess, like one of the folks that maybe did not vote for this, that I guess my question would be, I would want to know what you just said. I would want to see that so I could understand what that $400,000 was. I would want to see that it's permitting and stuff. Is that?
All right, is there the ability to drill down on that on a project level for the cost per project, as to break down not just the total dollars expended on that project, but where that money went to within that project?
I don't think we can get it off the system that way, but what we could probably do is when we can provide you with a quarterly report that gives that information, and we could post that to the website that people could see. I don't think we can get it in there, but that's something we'll have to work with our IT staff to see if we can do.
I think for our purposes, in the way that I foresaw this meeting going, is that we would look at the actual dollars expended retroactively for the previous quarter. And then I would ask for questions and we would discuss it, and then ask for a motion to make a recommendation to approve, second, and vote on it. So we would have to have the actual numbers available to us. And I agree that if we have the numbers available to us in making our recommendation to support those expenditures, it would be nice if the public had access to those same numbers. And then prospectively, the second half of this is where we look, where are you planning to spend dollars from the sales tax in the next quarter? We would like to also have that broken down in a similar manner. Remaining to focus on the fact of how we broke down and have been talking about the sales tax expenditures in those 4 areas, and then the ability to break down within those areas how those dollars are spent. it would be really hard for this committee, I believe, to make a recommendation one way or the other without having some specificity as to what those dollars went for. And then the public is going to want to know that same kind of information. So just the fact that you spent $400,000 on Lehigh is great, but where did those dollars go? And your explanation makes perfect sense.
Yes.
But that's just an explanation that I think not just this committee is going to want, but and going forward, the public's going to want. Mr. Steve.
I'd have some concern if we only had reported what we have expended dollars on, and we simply confirmed that those dollars spent fell within the parameters of what was represented to the public that we were going to do with the sales tax dollars. I would hope that this committee, if you look at this fiscal year, the budget at 18-19, there are all of, maybe 12 line items of items specifically represented that would be done this year. And I would hope every time this committee meets that we have a representation by management, the school board administration, on a project-by-project basis as to whether they project that the ultimate project expenditure will be under budget, at budget, or over budget for each of those line items.
Yeah, I think
absent that, this committee can only rubber stamp dollars that have already gone out the door and confirm to the public, yep, they got spent on that. And I don't think that's doing our job looking forward. So that I think if we have a project in a fiscal year, the representation on the project, for example, I'll just take high school 3M, you know, the $2,535,000, that spreads over a 3 fiscal year thing. And I think on a quarter-by-quarter basis that the administration should be able to report to us whether or not they anticipate that 3M will be ultimately within its budget, under its budget, or over its budget, so that in fact steerage could happen. Absent that, we won't be functioning on behalf of the public's interest.
Yeah, I think that's well stated, and that fits within the original concept that we talked about, retroactively looking how the money was spent, but also prospectively looking strategically. Is the expenditure and the projected expenditures the most strategic or most efficient and effective way to spend those dollars, and to make sure that they're within the original budget? And when budgets move, we need to know that before it actually happens instead of after the fact.
Well, and I would also add, I mean, I lived in the industry for years. The concept of under expenditure, on budget, and over expenditure, things will always run over budget, things will always run under budget, some things will always run on budget. The task is in aggregate to make sure that in aggregate you're performing what you set out to do within an aggregate budget. And I would not offer up that you're going to have a tantrum from me if you see a project on an individual basis at over, but I think we should be looking at the trends as to over and underage, and whether or not administration is, you know, in fact spending the dollars in anticipation of what they set out to do. So, and I'm not quite sure how you structure that report, but I would like us to task, you know, to at least say, hey, this is what we need in order to do our job.
I'll commit to working with staff. I completely understand what you're asking for, and I think I will work with staff and try to format the presentation in such a way that meets your needs.
Well, and Joe, I've run capital plans, and if they want my time in it, we can't help together, but I would be willing to, you know, put my efforts in order to set up some kind of a framework so that we can track, because absent that, you know, the fact that we spent $405,000 on mitigation credits sounds great, but it doesn't tell you anything about the big picture. And it's early, let's get those things in place.
Listen, I yield to your expertise in construction budgeting and capital budgeting, and would ask if you wanted to meet with staff. That would prevent me from having to do so. So yeah. Staff will meet with Steve and set up a format in which, and I would say if it's good enough for Steve, it's good enough for me. Yeah.
Maybe what we do is we bring back a format and show it to the committee and say to you all, does this work for you?
Yeah, and bring back a format that the administration can fulfill. So that's important.
I don't think this committee needs a report on every line item expenditure and what it was before. I think this committee should be looking at whether or not we are delivering the total project in aggregate within the total dollars that were approved.
I agree.
And,
Steve, I agree with what your last statement there, because, I don't want to get so down into the weeds. It's, it's every line item of detail, but we have to trust your judgment on trying to help them with kind of those big ticket items or buckets underneath these budgeted amounts.
Mr. Chairman?
The spreadsheet's not that complex. We ought to be able to do it in a pretty clear fashion, so. And I'll be
Okay.
glad to meet with whomever would be the lead person of the district at that.
I saw the superintendent shaking his head up and down that he can put together the right people in a room with you to make that happen.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chairman, if I may provide a little bit more information. A challenge that we're having today is we have neither received revenue nor been able to allocate funding to the projects that we're funding. That we're using cash, and we will need to move the funds there. So our ability today to be able to drill down and demonstrate information when we don't have that information in place. We're live integrated with our ERP system, and the data in the system doesn't exist to demonstrate the funds have come in and that we've allocated those funds specifically here. So our intent is exactly as Mr. Schimpf described, and we anticipate that at our next meeting, we will have live actual data that will be able to demonstrate and the drill down ability, and we anticipate being able to go project by project and talk about and provide expenditures and schedule updates as indicated.
I think the important part that I have not seen yet, and I have seen prototypes of where you want to be able to drill down to, but just one other column as to where we are vis-a-vis the budget. Overall, not line item by line item, but overall per project. So that the committee has a sense that we can present to the board with our quarterly reports that the school board and the administration is going to be able to deliver what they said they were going to deliver for the sales tax revenue. And I think that's the big point that Steve was alluding to when he says that not everything's going to be on budget. Some's going to be over, some's going to be under. But the comfort that we want to present to the school board and the public is that the school system will be, and the administration with the board will be able to provide to the public and to the district the amenities they said they would when they presented this issue to the voters.
I think that's where we need to head.
Okay. Yeah. We're good?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's go with what we have. Let's go to the next box then and continue on, knowing that the format is not fluid yet because there are no revenues in place, but let's look at the expenditures that you will be replenishing when the revenues come to place, if that's possible. Did that make any sense?
Can you say that again, please?
Go through the areas in which we have been always look: construction projects, safety projects, maintenance projects, technology projects. Go through those and show us the expenditures you've made to date in those areas. While those revenues haven't come from sales tax, because you haven't had any yet, you have made expenditures in those areas that I suspect will be replenished with sales tax dollars when the sales tax revenues come. Is that what you're contemplating doing?
Ms. Letcher, can you come to the podium?
It was just the two areas that we spoke.
Come to the mic so the folks at home can hear too, please.
Sorry. It was the two areas that I spoke about. It was the high school MMM and then lighting at Estero High School. That's what we've expended dollars on so far.
Out of all the areas, the rest of the areas, we haven't expended any dollars yet?
Nothing's been paid yet to show expenditures. We've done work, we've done security work and things like that, but nothing's been
Paid, okay.
Yes, so nothing's been paid, so it doesn't show up as an expenditure yet.
That brings to mind a question. When you're reporting things, are you reporting cash out the door expenditures, or are you accruing billings that are approved and not yet paid in your shop?
We were only showing what's actually been paid.
So they're showing us a cash budget.
So this is a cash, okay.
That's what we were.
Well, you know, there are really two sides to this. One then is that we need to represent to the school board, and it would take administration representing it to us, that they have confirmed through internal controls that all the cash expenditures have fallen within the parameters of what was passed. And secondly, a look forward as to whether we are on budget to achieve what we set out to do.
Yeah, and I think we can do that. My staff has actually started working on that, so we'll be interested to sit with you and go through and show you what we have, and then you can help us with that.
All right, so there's no other expenditures on a cash basis for us to review this evening, correct?
Correct.
Joe. So where we got mixed up, Joe was asking, so you've identified 2 projects that monies have been spent on, and I didn't get the answer to the question. The other question was, Joe asked, does that mean they'll be replenished when the sales tax money comes in? Those 2 bucket areas? I'm missing something here.
So basically, what we've done in order to fund this is just pulled cash from other accounts to do it, other areas that we have, and then when we get the sales tax in, that money will go back into the other one, and we'll just keep working it that way.
The same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, sir, Ms. Caddy.
Are there other projects where there's work in process but not been paid?
Yes, I would think, yeah, that's what she referred to earlier, where they have had work done, they just haven't made the allocation of payment to those areas.
But do we have some sense of what that dollar amount is?
I don't see. Trey, do you know how much? I think we're $1 million in, oh, there's Dwayne, $1 million in safety and security, and there's some maintenance projects that are underway. I think there's some, about 3.6 worth of maintenance projects that are underway. And what we'll do for the, and I apologize that we didn't have it for this one, is we'll have a list of the projects that are underway so that you all can see what they're working on as well, or what's proposed to be worked on. Did you need more?
You're also using the funding to support Lehigh Addition.
And Lehigh Senior High School addition is currently underway as well. Thank you.
So, all right, so that's the maintenance projects and construction projects, safety projects. You had, what did you say you had?
1.3, about 1.3 million.
And how about technology projects?
So you think,
We have not expended any additional funds on technology, we have not brought any additional funds on technology projects until
All right.
April.
So as of this time, there is no money allocated that would be replenished from sales tax for technology, and the other numbers are going to be replenished, as stated earlier, in the area of maintenance and safety. Questions amongst everybody?
That's good clarification, Joe, thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be better when, because governments do cash accounting on a cash system, it's going to be better when they actually start paying bills. It's a little sketchy this time.
right, but are they gonna end up spending the whole $5 million before they even get it and never be able to catch up?
Yeah, that's an interesting, well, I need to talk to staff also, because this, I mean, to do it on a quarterly basis is for us to be with a straight face, for me to stand in a straight face after this group discusses this issue and support to the school board that this group believes they expended dollars in the last quarter, and while we haven't expended any dollars, we've definitely incurred cost and accrued.
If you look on the budget outlook sheet that you have, you'll see there was $105 million for a bond. That was the reason that we talked to the board about going for the bond, was so that we could get the cash in and have the cash so that we're not pulling cash from other areas in order to fund the sales tax projects that are underway.
Yeah, that was, as I remember it, that was specifically set aside for the Lehigh Senior Edition and School MMM.
It allows us to use the cash that come for any of those projects that's not specific to that. That was the ones that we pulled in because we were going to need the cash right away, but we can use it for others, and then as the cash starts coming in, use the cash to do the schools as well.
questions from the other members?
So I need a little clarification. So is our role to validate what they've already done and/or encumbered, or is our role to look at what is proposed and say it sits within? So we're gonna
do both. Is my understanding is that our purview is to do both, to confirm that they spent the dollars in a method consistent with the resolution that brought the referendum forward, and then to prospectively look at where they are going to spend money in the next quarter, not to say that it's to both look that it's within the realm of the referendum, but also that have them tell us strategically how and why those expenditures, proposed expenditures for the next quarter are strategically the most efficient and effective use of the sales tax dollars.
And I'll make the assumption that the expenditures are made in accordance with the mission.
I suspect that's the easy part.
What happens, or what is the next step if it is not? Just trying to go ahead here for a moment. What is our?
I don't know the answer to that question, and I raised that question with my neighbor this morning as we were talking about this meeting and saying, what happens if staff presents a cadre of projects prospectively and we disagree? Now, the chances of them presenting expenditures after this meeting that we would disagree with based on the projects, because we've already prospectively approved the projects, is probably slim or none. But prospectively looking, if we disagreed with strategically that the projects presented to us for immediate consideration for use of sales tax are strategically not the most efficient and effective use of those dollars, we would disagree with staff. I don't know what happens at that point.
Well, I spent the time to read the resolution in detail.
Yeah.
And the 4 areas of expenditure are fairly clear, and I'm not sure that it's our job to rule whether a new stairway in a new stairway program falls within or outside. The key for us is whether they fall within the guidelines of the resolution that was passed by the district. And it would be unfortunate if this committee got down to the level of saying, we think you ought to do that one, but not do this one.
I don't think that's...
I think it's ours to report that, in fact, the district is operating within the 4 parameter areas and confirming that. But to make judgment as to one project about what, we don't think that falls within, this may be so fluid over time that projects both move into and move out of the sphere of these dollars. And I think that the real key is, are we making the budgets for the items that we set out to do or move in or out?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with Steve. I'm not interested in being involved in determining if a project is appropriate or not, and I don't believe that's the role of this committee. And if it is, then I need to revisit it. So.
Yeah, I think the district needs to judge its needs as to where they need the specific things. I do have a concern, however, Dennis, and you raised the question. Going to be darn tough for this engineer to represent to the school board on a quarterly basis that the expenditures are being done in accordance with the resolution without some mechanism for controls, whether that be an internal audit department that you already have within the district, or whether that be an annual outside firm that comes in and confirms that what's been represented to us on an audit level or a review level. I think everyone will be best served, both the administration, the taxpayer, and this board, if there is some level of control set up on a formal level. And I'd like for staff to give consideration to that. Not necessarily that we need an audit. It may be a review by an outside firm. It may be that you have sufficient internal controls and people who are here to make representations, but we ought to know the level at which that is done.
My experience with government on annual audits, and I suspect the school board has an annual outside audit, is that bond issues are specifically highlighted in that ordinance for compliance with the bond issue. So any dollars bonded would be that way, and I would suspect that because the referendum identified a special revenue source, it would be identified in the audit as a special revenue source and also tracked and audited annually separately from school board funds.
But our job is to comply with a resolution that was presented to the boarders, a board resolution.
Yeah, and that's what the audit would track. The audit would track, are these expenditures, and that's annually. And I'm going to look to the superintendent. Is my expectations correct?
Yes. I can tell you yes.
Okay, that's.
Haven't been in that position yet.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Other questions at this point?
Let me just make a quick statement.
Sure.
So I agree, Steve and Joe, with what we're talking about. We don't want to get into the weeds. But as this committee is progressing and you talk with your neighbor, I also get the neighborhood conversation. And so what I'm trying to build here is a response as a representative of the committee of the layperson saying, well, what if they don't? Or what if this? And I think that's what we as representatives here need to polish up and be aware of. And in the workshop we had 2 weeks ago or so where we rolled out this website was a great addition to this process. So you're to be commended for that, and I think that's where it goes to the transparency of what we're talking about. But I'm trying to gather that. What's my best answer when I get asked that question? And as a representative of this group, I think we all need to be thinking in those terms.
Jim?
Dennis, does this help at all? Because I've already been asked this question. There is a facilities committee, and that is a lot closer to their role and responsibility, and I think Steve has hit on it really clear. There are 4 key areas that were in the referendum. That's where our focus and energy needs to be. But I think back to your issue of how do you answer the question, I think I just simply say there is a facilities committee, there is an oversight process, and they're the ones that are digging down deeper than we are in that sense. We've got one specific task.
But what if, and I think the question is, and you're absolutely correct, and we talked about that even at our first meeting, that there are other committees that we don't want to duplicate their efforts. What if there comes a time, and I don't foresee this happening, but just in case, what if there becomes a time where we would disagree with an expenditure? I would suspect we would include that in our quarterly report to the school board, and that's what we raise it to the school board's attention, and it's up to them to deal with it. That was my answer to my neighbor this morning.
I think that's the answer. You know, this committee, by the nature of the way it's set up, has a direct pipeline to the school board and its reports as to its opinion as to whether administration is operating within parameters. And that's what we would do, would be bring it up in our report to the school board that we believe you have problems.
Or at least a discrepancy.
If that were the case. Yeah.
Everyone, is that?
Yeah, because but the what if would be an expenditure that is outside of the realm.
Outside of our oversight, which Steve brought up very early. The resolution clearly defines where the money's spent.
Correct. The chances of having an expenditure that is outside, for example, for salaries or something like that, that is outside of it, right? And I just don't see something like that coming before this board.
All right. I think that, any other comments, questions? We feel comfortable where we are at?
I just simply want to give a reminder, we also have an obligation to the public. So as this conversation started, it's incumbent upon each individual to have a level of comfort with how they're discussing your position on some of those expenses to the public.
Is it our position to say about spending the money before they get it, or is that not even in our realm? In other words, we now have a bond and we're spending the money prior to it receiving it, and so we're paying a cost for all that money versus just spending money once they receive it.
If I understand your question correctly, I contemplate us having 2 motions at each meeting. One, retrospectively confirming that the expenditures for the prior quarter were in compliance with the bondage. And then looking forward, that the projects contemplated for the next quarter are within the guidelines and constraints of the resolution. That's all I see us doing every quarter, those 2 motions, and approving the minutes. That's it. I don't see us making any other issues. And then As chairman, my report to the school board will be, we made a motion to do this, we made a motion to do that. And that gives public notice along with the school board. I suspect I'm going to have to be making those meetings to a school board meeting, publicly at a meeting.
I suspect you're right.
Yes.
Don't bet. All right, well, let's get back under the agenda, the expenditures through March. I will not ask you for a motion because we have no real sales tax expenditures for March. Any questions or comments about that direction? All right, let's look at the projected budget report for the upcoming quarter.
Okay, so the budget outlook that was presented to the school board has been distributed to you in advance, and the first page is the summary for the out years, and the individual projects that are presented on pages 2, 3, and 4 indicate the different programs, beginning with the construction programs, which we've talked a little bit about. The maintenance, the safety projects, and, oops, I'm sorry. There it is, kind of straddling the screen there. I believe, so do we have any questions about any particular projects? The materials were sent in advance, and we have representatives available to address any questions on any of the projects that have been presented.
Questions? Chris?
So are we to presume that everything in the budgeted FY 18-19 year will be completed by June 30th?
Our current schedule, yes.
So there's been no changes here, we've just...
Correct.
So that's the quarter ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting because we are coming into this during the school board's last quarter of their fiscal year. That's why it doesn't look like it's broken down for a quarter, because it is. Whatever's going to be spent in 18-19 is going to be spent in its last quarter. So let's talk about any questions in the construction projects for the 18-19. We've already talked about those.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I see the budget here and I understand we're in the final quarter here, but you guys have this estimated budget, so you guys must have some bids, some contracts already in place to know where these numbers are going to lie. Is that a correct assumption here?
Yes, the district has in place continuing contracts for services, and when we went out to bid last year for those contracts, we awarded to all qualified vendors. So I believe we have 11 vendors on one contract, and they're lined up. They are ready to go when we pull the trigger, and so we have the resources available. We have identified the projects to be performed, and we have initiated some projects already, and the ones that are listed here are the ones that are scheduled to proceed.
Okay, so it would be safe to assume that these budgeted numbers are going to be pretty close to actual?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And any dollars unspent at the end of this year will be carried forward to next year.
Yes, and I want to be clear too, they will be started, not necessarily completed, so you won't see an expenditure until it's completed. So it will appear as if it's still a budget, even though it's underway, until we have the final thing. So it takes a while to get through some of these.
If I remember correctly, public agencies cannot procure services for more than monies they have on hand. That's still the case?
Yes, we need to have the budget.
I would offer up to the committee, and it runs to your question. In construction projects in particular, it would not be abnormal, say, in the context of a $40 million project that has $3 million budgeted for this fiscal year, for that number to be either $1 million or $5 million, depending on whether the project is ahead, behind. I mean, the simple single billing in a project of that size can swing those numbers. So we need to appreciate that there will be variations in timing. The important thing is to track the aggregate future event.
Yeah, and the addition of the column you're talking about will identify that for all of us very clearly.
Yeah, and you know, we ought to get a little closer to that with a system, but, you know, that $3,850,000, for example, in 18-19, there's no way for staff to get that dead on, but they ought to be hitting on the aggregate and reporting to us whether the $65 million number is still intact for the future. Okay?
Okay. Any other questions on the construction projects for the upcoming quarter? Safety projects. Maintenance projects. As we do the presentation of the public website, we can see where you have the ability to click on the line item like air conditioning and see how many schools are included in the HVAC stuff. So, sounds like some of you have already been playing with the website. Questions on maintenance? Technology? There's no debt service for this upcoming quarter.
Joe, I have a question on the revenue side.
Yes, sir.
The placing of the $105 million note, is that being done this fiscal year because of anticipation of lower interest rates and concern about the future, or why we're getting that money ahead of when we need it cash flow wise? Why is that being done?
Yeah, we were proposing to do that because we figure that we're going to start seeing large numbers coming in from construction projects within the next year or so, and we want to make sure that we can cover those as they come in.
All right. Has that been placed at this point? So it may, that's within the next 3 months or 6 months kind of thing, right?
Yes, we've
Okay,
been working with our financial advisors to go out at the right time and get the best rates and everything.
Thank you.
So.
Jim.
Might be coming right back. Just curious, on the continuing agreement that you mentioned before, is that specific to specific projects, or is that more to a broader range or general? I don't know how.
You mean on the continuing projects for the procuring the?
So you mentioned that there were a number of different entities that were bundled together under a continuing agreement.
So we have multiple continuing contracts,
Right.
and we have multiple awards to under each of the categories. So we have multiple vendors, for example, to support roofing projects.
Okay. So, so like, is there a standard, just out of curiosity, of length of time of those continuing agreements? I know we always use 3 years, but I don't know.
Yes, the standard, it's driven by statute. It's a 3-year period for the continuing contracts.
Mr. Chair.
Chris.
Could I ask a question related to your assumptions and revised assumptions? So, to me, it looks like we've revised up our assumptions significantly from 31.6 million at our last meeting to now 39.5 million. And it looks like our new assumptions are that those revenue estimates are going to grow at 6% per year for the next 10 years, providing a delta of about $320 million over the course of this tax. Does this committee agree with those assumptions? And do we have anything to revise in the out years to adjust to an additional $300 million in revenue?
So we've looked at the out years, and we definitely have more things that we can do. When we initially set the projects up, our first one was the 724 million, I think it was, and so there were projects even then that we were not going to be able to fund. So what we'll do is bring those other projects back in that were on the list, but we couldn't fund.
And do we have an idea as to why this was so off?
Yeah, if you look at the sheet, and I think she's brought it up, and I think if you go up one more, this is where the original projections were done. When we started the original projections, if you look at the amounts at that time, they were much lower than what had actually been collected. We were working off of the Office of Demographic and Research's number. They had a site that said, if you had gone out for the half-cent sales tax, this is how much you could earn, and we were basing it on that. And then when we, and that was, in all those years, and then it's when I came back and looked again, and we went deeper and said, okay, so show me actual collections, and figured out by actual collections how much a half a cent would be. That increased it.
So the 6% increase on the revenue estimates is based off a 5-year average that is slightly higher than 6%.
Correct.
But you're believing that we're going to sustain a 6% growth rate over a 10-year period?
I did a 6%, even though the average was higher for those years that it won't, because if you look in the
last 5 years.
Yes, and we'll readjust those as they come through.
That's indicative of how government projects. They go back 5 years, linear progress forward based on the 5-year. It's the way, when I do revenue projections for new areas who want to become cities, I have to use that methodology even though I know that it's probably flawed, because it's just not the way the world works. Revenues, business revenue cycles, especially sales tax, are cyclical based on business curves and outside economic conditions, but that's not the way that government projects revenue. I wish I could. It goes above my pay grade to change that.
We will be relooking at that.
I would just have some concerns about prospectively approving projects that are based upon a delta of 300 million plus.
Yeah.
And I think that's why before you were talking about approving current year and 1 year out, because that's what is really more in line with what we can do.
That's why I was saying that anything past the next fiscal year is a lot more art than science.
But I would say that this goes into the district's facilities planning and budget planning. My opinion is that's an aggressive.
Yeah, I would concur. If they're using these numbers, your plan is to use these numbers in your 5-year CIP?
It will be part of our facilities work plan. And
That's why 5-year CIPs change drastically.
Yes, and we can change that if you all don't believe that that's truly what is going to happen.
Let's get a full year under our belts as Lee County collecting the dollars and see what the impact of the actual half cent is. And if we would like to make an additional recommendation to the school board to direct the administration to look at future projections, we have something to base it on.
Yeah.
Let's get a year under our belt. Steve?
How does this sheet of numbers tie to the sales tax revenue on the 5-year?
If you scroll down to the other one for me, because I don't have it in front of me right here. If you look over to the right, the yellow piece, thank you very much.
I got it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm sorry.
You could have answered that by saying you're a blind man, Steve. Look over there.
I would never do that.
What is the delta on the 5-year plan? So you have a 5-year total of $406 million.
I would have to go back and figure it. I don't have that.
Very slow.
Yeah, it doesn't show the aggregate, so it'd have to be.
I can do that in just a few minutes if you all want me to.
Delta gets larger as it goes out.
Yes.
Absolutely. But we should be focused on the short term.
Fletcher, our Director of Budget.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I said thank you, Ms. Fletcher, our Director of Budget. Just wanted to make sure everybody know who is addressing your questions.
That is very important, and we should continually remember that we're going out live, so we should be introducing ourselves to the public as we come up and make presentations.
I have a quick question as
Sure.
it relates to,
Dennis?
you're talking these outer years. Dennis Perlman. How is the school board accounting for the maintenance responsibilities that are going to exist for the projects that we're building beyond this 10-year period of funding? Is that something that's considered in here? That's a curiosity question, maybe outside our scope, but that's been asked of me.
I'd like to ask Mr. Rickenbacker to talk about, as we build new schools, the plan for out years for maintenance.
Out years for maintenance?
Yep.
Can't really speak to maintenance, but And the question is?
Restate the question, please, Dennis.
So the question is, we're if you look at this and there's hundreds of millions of dollars in capital projects, with that is going to be maintenance costs that need to be considered, but our funding source is going to stop in 10 years. So as we're building this through, how much of that is going to be needed to be either set aside or found money for the maintenance aspect of these projects that we're building?
Well, I think if we show we're good stewards of the money over the 10-year period, I would hope that if the community continues to grow and the need for schools is such, I would hope that we have the ability to continue forward. But I can tell you right now, of all of our new schools, if you were to add up the potential cost, it's about, for the 5-year plan that we have now, it's about $472 million. In your initial projection of $750 million initially, obviously this funding isn't going to pay for schools outright in the beginning, and hence the participation notes, the tax participation notes, rather than COPS funding. So I don't know how to answer your question in terms of maintenance.
I can add one additional piece of information, that is each year we receive per pupil funding, and that's based on the the students that we have, the seats that we have, and so that per pupil funding is used for that as well. Ms. Cedino, do you have any additional information that you'd like to add?
And Mr. Chairman,
introduce yourself.
Get into the weeds because
No,
that's
no, no.
their business, but it's a...
Actually, you raised a very good point, especially since we've identified this huge delta from the original projections of revenue to what it is. It may be within our purview to make a recommendation to the school board as to what we may do with some of those funds in that used delta, is to start with.
And back of the envelope, $67 million over the first 5 years, which leaves a delta of about 230 in the second 5.
Yeah, well, I knew it was going to...
67 is the equivalent of a new school.
Right. The way the numbers go when you do these kind of projections, that it's going. I knew it was going to be the predominant amount was in the out years, but even 67 million could be a great set aside for reserve replacement. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, good evening. My name is Barbara Cedino from the Maintenance Services Department. I'm the Assistant Director. So as this project continues to expand and grow, one of the things that Maintenance Services has done is that we have developed like spreadsheets in-house that actually tracks as new schools come on board, we are actually tracking them and adding out to our existing spreadsheet. And depending on the type of equipment that we are actually upgrading in the future, each of those items has a life cycle and a replacement period. So what we have done is that instead of keeping a 10-year cycle, we have actually expanded our spreadsheet to go out 20 to 30 years with percentage increases within each of those years. So as the years progress, we kind of have an idea based on those projections of how much we should be anticipating on the years that exceed the 10-year period.
So they're establishing a capital maintenance program.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any other comments or questions with regard to the projected expenditures? Since we do have a list of projected expenditures in front of us, I would ask for a motion to approve the projected expenditures as presented by staff.
Second.
I have a motion with Joe. What was you, Joe?
What period is that for, Joe?
This is this quarter, this next quarter, one quarter, to the end of the fiscal year. Carmen was second. Discussion to the motion. Being no discussion, I sent you ready to vote on motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Presentation on the public website. We've been playing with it already. Is there anything else that you want, any other bells and whistles you want to show us at this time?
There is one additional item that we'd like to show you, and that is that your committee website has launched. So as you go to the district's main page, you can go to leadership, School Board, and you can drop down to the Independent Sales Surtax Oversight Committee link. On here, you will see a description of the committee, and at the bottom, the calendar, as well as there will be folders for each year. So for each school year, you'll have your agendas and minutes, so you will have access to that information online, as will the public. So we have all of the minutes that have been distributed and the agendas that have been posted so far are on file, and that'll continue to accumulate.
Questions? If you haven't been to the website, I suggest you go through it. It is easy to navigate. Even I can do it. That's my normal test. If it's user-friendly right there, if I can get through it, it's pretty user-friendly. Other questions? Okay. Member comments. Any member comments?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment and kind of a question. This may be more appropriate for staff or school board representation. With the section of the sales tax covering school hardening and safety, is that going to equate to student safety outside of the building? With the tragedy in Cape Coral on Monday with the poor young lady who lost her life at the bus stop, as I'm sure there will be conversations with the district and other stakeholders in the city of Cape Coral or other communities, are these funds applicable to any ideas that may come about to light bus stops, harden bus stops, create a bench, something like that?
If I may, I think it's a little early for us to address that specifically because investigations are ongoing with Cape Coral Police Department and the Transportation Department. In addition, we're working closely with not just Cape Coral, but other police agencies throughout the county to determine best practices, looking nationwide. So we have no idea at this point what the potential cost of that could be or even what steps should be taken. I know there was an announcement earlier today about putting lights on students' backpacks and a fundraising effort surrounding that. I think that's just one small step, but I don't think I can accurately answer that until I have more information from staff about partnerships.
Thank you. I know it's early. I know the upswell is just starting. Thank you.
Hey, Greg Adkins, Superintendent. Just to give you an update of where we are, we have reached out and talked to a couple different agencies. John Zerlacher, who's the Cape Coral City Manager, reached out yesterday, and what we are doing is putting together a committee that's comprised of our safety and security and transportation staff, along with his staff to really study the needs in the city of Cape Coral. We are going to hopefully do the same with our other municipalities. What is interesting about all of this in terms of bus stops is that really the school district's area of responsibility starts when that student gets, onto that bus and it's transported to school. However, having stated that, I think it's actually a shared community responsibility, the school district and the municipalities, the county, in terms of trying to take steps to make sure our students are safer. So we do anticipate working forward. We'll have a better answer for you at a next meeting because honestly, the bus stop piece of this was not something that was anticipated in our safety and security plan. We were focused predominantly on school safety in and around a school building and facility.
Thank you very much. Other member comments?
I wanted to just let you know that I will not be at the June committee meeting. I will be out of the country.
All right. So much for your paycheck.
Doc, you want to split it between the rest of us?
I'll go with you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, the next meeting is Thursday, June 27th, 2019 at 6 p.m. in these chambers. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second? Motion second. Discussion. Objection. Motion carries. To adjourn is always faster.